I recommend anyone who wants to know about BioWare's Mass Effect Andromeda development check out this Kotaku article by Jason Schreier. This guy spent the last 3 months to figure out what happened, so props to him and Kotaku. I know that's a rare thing to say about Kotaku, but if true, the information is somewhat eye-opening. Here's a list of the things that happened during the production. The directors in charge changed multiple times. There were rescopes even after pre-production, which is after the prototyping phase, which technically is no longer production. It's back to pre-production. There's an understaffed animation team. There were technological challenges. There was the Frostbite engine. There were tool sets for animation. There were new animation programs that animators had to learn or relearn. There were communication issues, so that makes 3 teams across 3 different time zones, and there was multiple outsourcing teams. There were office politics. You can check those all out on Glassdoor. There was compressed timeline. Now, that's kind of hard to grasp. That's pretty much self-imposed. They had 5 years. That's plenty of time for them to figure it out. And then the brutal crunch time, which is pretty much the same as the previous statement. Essentially what that means is the game actually took 1.5 years to make. So even though the game took 5 years to make, the majority of it happened in the last 18 months. So out of those 5 years, the last 30% of it was where everything happened, which means more than half of that time, or 3.5 years, was spent prototyping, brainstorming, and figuring out what didn't work or what they couldn't do, which is fine, provided the last 30% is absolute gold of structured, hard work where everything falls into place and you're not second-guessing yourself. That can in fact be done with good management, but that wasn't the case. Back in 2012, Casey Hudson started up a project called Dylan. Hudson wanted to make the Bob Dylan of video games, one that would be referenced for years to come, whatever that means. I mean, this is the guy who made the Mass Effect franchise, and it's still being referenced, so okay, maybe he knows what he's talking about. Oh, and then he greenlighted the ending of Mass Effect 3, so yeah, starting franchises, good. Ending them, probably not. Hudson was also working on the next Mass Effect, and the idea was to bring back exploration and do it properly. Feedback from the community said they wanted a sequel, not a prequel. This makes sense, as the highlight of the franchise is continuity. You want things to continue, your choices to matter, you want the same characters, you want to see what happens next. You want consistent lore. This is the same draw as the Suikoden series and the Metal Gear series. It's a world we're not only familiar with, we actually like and want to see more of. Keep in mind the Metal Gear series pretty much did most of their work in prequel land with Metal Gear Solid 3, 5, and the handheld games, and I think they were all largely successful. The problem with BioWare's case, or at least Mass Effect's case, is they didn't just poison the well. They atomized, then blew it up with multicolored magical galactic explosions. So there'd be little chance of continuity due to the ending of Mass Effect 3, so they had to somehow retain the same setting and characters, but invalidate your choices. And thus, going to a brand new galaxy with the goal of exploration was born. Now, there are other ways to handle that in a sequel, by selecting a canon ending, for example, or completely disregarding the ending of Mass Effect 3 and doing something new, using an alternate universe, or getting a decent writer. But they settled on a soft reboot, via inventing a new technology to travel to a new galaxy, which pretty much invalidates the idea of continuity because you're literally in a new galaxy with new aliens. Not that there's much there to talk about, and the old aliens we love are all weirdly designed and all look the same. Some of them aren't even there. And the sexy female-shaped, they just don't look good. I mean, sure, maybe there's an attractive one, but I mean, look at this nose. I don't care how Italian I am. That is not a pretty nose. So you combine that with a horrible reason for going there.
Some for discovery, to see the unknown.
Exploration for the sake of it. And you've got a premise for a loved franchise that fails before it starts. Alright, so now it's 2013. BioWare replaced Casey Hudson on Mass Effect and hired a new director of Spider-Man games called Gerard Lehani, who came up with the idea of going to a brand new galaxy to run from the Reaper threat. He also wanted to do procedural planets, which is crazy, and yes, that is a No Man's Sky idea before No Man's Sky came around. Oh boy. This also involved flying a spaceship and actively landing on a planet. Sounds familiar, right? The team had problems trying to shoehorn a linear story into a procedurally generated series of random levels. Wow. These prototypes were developed from 2013 to 14. So already 3 years have passed with a new director to do something experimental. This was also during the time the Dragon Age Inquisition team transitioned to Andromeda or were finishing up. They had made some tools from working with Frostbite, but not all of them. The problem is with Frostbite, you just couldn't do things it wasn't designed for. For example, handle levels to exceed 100 by 100 kilometers. One line that got me thinking in the article was this one, quote, "Other struggles included the streaming system, the save system, and various action RPG mechanics that Andromeda needed in order to work," end quote. Levels aren't working. Streaming system, I assume, means dynamic loading. Saving and basic gameplay mechanics weren't ready when they went into pre-production, which means you're not in production. You're still building your tools and prototypes. So during 2013, the development team had a good time. They had all sorts of new ideas waiting to be tested. They had a new director. There was a new studio in Montreal. You had 3 big projects going. You had Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and Dylan. But once 2014 came around, Edmonton and Montreal studios were fighting. Edmonton said pre-production was bad and they didn't have a strong vision for the game. Montreal was based with all kinds of politics, who's in charge of what, who do we respond to, who do we listen to. And the Montreal studio was losing dozens of people, and that's particularly the animation team. So in August of 2014, Casey Hudson left the company, and then so did Gerard Lehiani. Now, Lehiani was in charge of the writing team at the time, and then Mac Walters was hired to replace both. Now, this is a huge deal. You've just lost 2 directors for 2 major projects, and you're putting in charge a guy who was the lead writer, a writer of Mass Effect 2 and 3. This is a recipe for disaster. Still, this is going to be a very special moment for me. I have to hand it to Mac Walters. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but he stuck around. You know, the ship was sinking. He's still here. I don't know if that's what makes him brave or foolish, but he cared enough to hang around for what he believed in. Whether or not he was qualified or the right person for the job is a whole other argument, but he hung around because he believed in Mass Effect. And I gotta give him that. But that's all. So during this time as well, combat was working, the Nomad was working. That's great, but flying your spaceship and landing on a procedurally generated planet wasn't. That wasn't working right, it just wasn't fun. Quote, "Okay, now imagine doing this 100 more times or 1,000 more times," end quote. And this is part of the failure of the premise, because they wanted to have procedurally generated planets, hundreds or thousands of them. You do anything 100 times on the scale of a planet, and it probably won't be that fun. It'll be something of a chore, I guess. There has to be some variation, some randomization, something to keep your mind going, something to motivate you. So the very idea of doing such a thing so involved so often was doomed to failure. Now, I remember playing through Mass Effect and going on the uncharted worlds. It wasn't that exciting. I actually liked driving the Mako, and I wanted that story. I was hoping that some story would pop up out of all this, because the main story was so compelling. The characters drew me in. Now, I would argue storytelling or story would fix this problem in Andromeda by giving you a reason to land on a planet, a dramatic one, a personal one, a plot one, an alien artifact plot, whatever. But for hundreds of planets? In any storyline, no, it just can't be done. Not in any practical time frame for game development. Maybe a few randomly generated planets following a plot, maybe. But that's still a lot of work. Continued in part.
Ah, come on! Come on, yeah!